Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Police Foundation's Friday Exchange for May. I'm Rick Muir. I'm Director of the Police Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this conversation around police organisational culture and workforce culture and how um, we might go about uh, delivering culture change in policing. That's one of the. It's a huge theme which policing's been wrestling with for a number of years, and has obviously been highlighted by a number of issues that have occurred in recent times. And so we wanted to really explore some how you achieve positive cultural change in difficult working environments. And so I'm delighted that today we've got a really excellent panel to discuss that and discuss some of the work that has been going on in a couple of forces, which I'll introduce in a minute. Just a few sort of ground rules. The first to say is that we do record these sessions and we do put them on our YouTube channel. So do bear that in mind in relation to anything you might say. Please don't say anything that you don't want to be broadcast. The other thing to say is that we do want audience participation and encourage and engagement in the sessions. So the way to do that is to just put a question or a comment in the chat, and I'll sort of chair the session. And if you've got questions for particular speakers or you've got questions just for the whole panel, I can then put that to them. So do feel free at any point in the conversation just to put comments in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll answer that as we go along. So with all that said, we've got a really great audience attending, which is really encouraging. And I'll just quickly introduce our panel. First of all, we have Chief Constable Jim Colwell from Devon and Cornwall Police. Very welcome to you, Jim.
Hi, Rick. Apologies for my tardy entrance. I was having technical issues, but
no, it's all right. You arrived exactly on time, which was just as we pressed go, you appeared, which was excellent. We also have Chief Constable Amanda Blakeman from North Wales Police. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Pinanda.
And we also have Joanna Traynor, who is one of the co-founders of Senseia, which is an organisation that works with organisations to deliver cultural change. So hi, Joanna.
Everyone. Hello, everyone.
And we have Jason Langley, the other co-founder of Senseia, and both Joanna and Jason have been working with the two constabularies we have with us. So hi, Jason, welcome.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Well, with those brief introductions done, I think it would be good. Where I wanted to start the conversation was to go to our two chief constables and to just get a sense from them about why they've been working with Joanna and Jason on projects around culture change, just so we can get a sense of what the starting point was. So, Jim, could we start with you? Because I think the work with you started earlier on and first. So if you could just tell us what the motivation was behind getting these guys involved and starting the project.
I really can, Rick. I've got a clear memory of the history, but so I manage my expectations. How long do you want me to do this? Because I can literally talk for hours about this. So,
well, just if you could just do a fairly brief introduction to the motivation, so
okay, fine. Yeah,
5 minutes or something. That would be
5 minutes. I can certainly do 5 minutes. Good afternoon, everybody. Jim Cole, as I say, Devon and Cornwall Chief. All my service in Devon and Cornwall. I can remember the distinct moment or series of events that triggered our subsequent working relationship with Senseia. May 20th, 2020, we had a young black man called Simeon Francis tragically die in one of our custody cells. For those of you that can remember as far back as that, that date is actually 5 days before George Floyd was killed in the States, and the subsequent Black Lives Matter reignition of that movement over the summer of 2020. At the same time, in my force, we had a number of conduct cases that were surfacing that had really quite horrible racist homophobic and sexist conduct at the heart of them. And at the time, the assistant chief constable declared a critical incident in relation to the kind of confluence of all of this within, what is otherwise, perceived to be a reasonably sedate regional police force. And I think I was an ACC at the time, and the chief turned around and said, "Right, can you lead our response to the critical incident?" And I set up a program of work. Central to that was a recognition to carry out work to understand what forces were at play within the organisation that was either driving some of this conduct. And I should say, Simeon Francis died of natural causes. There was no conduct or performance issues around the death of Simeon, but it was that was part of the context at the time. And so seeking to understand the organisational culture, what forces were at play that were either driving, encouraging, not preventing the kind of conduct or behaviour that we were seeing in the organisation at the kind of top level was very much part of that programme work. So this concept of a cultural audit was born. And I went out to the market in late 2020 to see who could assist us with that. And Senseia, Jason and Joanna were one of the companies that came forward in that procurement process. And I always say this, and they always look at me harshly, but I had, your typical blue chip consultancy firms that would come in and do a really flashbang wallop, great presentation. We can have your start to finish end report on your desk within 6 weeks. And then there was Jason and Joanna, and Jason and Joanna's methodology and indeed presentation was completely different. It was far more gritty, intimate, personal. They wanted to establish a long-term relationship with the organisation to get truly under the skin, and it was that approach that really took my attention, and they were given the contract, and we've been working with them ever since. That was 4 years ago. And what they did on behalf of the organisation was spend 12 months really seeking to understand some of the organisational psychology. And what the other thing I should have said attracted me to Senseia was the science behind their approach. These are qualified people who know what they're talking about when it comes to human psychology and why the human brain, certainly in situations of pressure, does certain things in terms of conduct, behaviour, relationships, how we treat each other, particularly under pressure. So they really took their time to understand us, which was really important to me. And there wasn't a final report. There never has been a final report. There's just been a really evidence-based understanding of what was going on, what has been going on, and what continues to go on in Devon and Cornwall Police, organisation 7,000 people, officers, staff and volunteers. And yeah, we went looking for certain things we thought we might find. What we actually found was a systemic issue of bias, discrimination and indeed misogyny in the organisation on a scale that, having worked here for 23 years, I didn't understand. And the early stages of feeding that knowledge into the organisation at the highest level, and I say this carefully, bearing in mind we had the longest serving chief constable in England and Wales at the time, that the processes we had to adopt, supported by Jason and Joanna, to move through that acceptance and acknowledgement, and to take blame and shame off the table, and it's just an understanding of what's going on around here. That was a really coordinated, thoughtful kind of piece of work to make sure this didn't bounce off the organisation because of the shame and blame that naturally goes with it, particularly amongst senior leaders. I was part of this. This has happened on my watch. I've been a senior leader in the organisation for years, and yet did I understand it? No, I didn't. It took Jason and Joanna to come in and really shine a light on it. Anyway, that whole understanding has informed and driven a really fundamental approach to inclusive leadership within the organisation. So we've put every single leader from chief constable down to sergeant and police staff equivalents, every single leader at every level of the organisation through our 3-day inclusive leadership programme, which is a difficult programme to sit through because it really does expose the reality of the situation. There's some harsh truths that are shared, and again, in every one of those 3-day cohorts, the whole shame and blame piece has to be exposed, talked through, put to one side, and just get to the real understanding of what's driving this behaviour in organisations. And to that point, the issue of cognitive overload, the issue of unrealistic expectations, the issue of a lack of meaningful dialogue, all of these kind of key elements of understanding have really informed my and other colleagues' approach to what leadership needs to look like, the kind of moments it needs to create within an organisation, particularly when an organisation has been under an extended period of pressure. And let's face it, every police force has in this country, because of austerity, because of accountability, because of the scrutiny that policing is quite rightly under, but sometimes feels somewhat unfair and disproportionate. So all of that comes together, in a tangible intervention in terms of training and workforce development, targeting our leaders at all levels. But it's only the first step, and we've done an awful lot of work with Jason and Joanna at the executive level to really develop an understanding of both ourselves and how our leadership plays out in the organisation, and what we need to dial up, dial down, and indeed role model, so that we're constantly revisiting this issue of how we treat each other within the organisation. Because I'm a fundamental believer, and I'm about to finish, so I don't know if I'm about 5 minutes in, but I'm going to stop in a minute. I'm a fundamental believer that how we treat each other inside the organisation impacts on how we treat others outside the organisation. And there's a tangible link between respect, courtesy, equality, equity of opportunity and esteem within the organisation, and in particular how we treat female colleagues, and how that plays out in terms of how we deal with the significant challenges around violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. And there we are.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jim. I mean, a huge amount to explore in the course of the conversation after that. I'm just turn now to Amanda. If you could just say a bit about, your motivation for bringing in, what was your starting point in inviting Senseia in to work with you?
No, so thank you very much, and really interested to hear Jim's take on it. James and I work together, but I've never heard James speak about it, and we're experiencing similar sorts of things, really. So I've got 32 years service in policing, and police culture has had a huge effect on me over that 32 years. It's affected my service, it's affected the way that I've delivered to communities on occasion, and therefore, as I've moved through leadership and had different roles, I've been very sensitive to it and very inquiring about it, because it's something that I see as a fundamental issue for any organisation, policing, health, education. Any big organisation has got to really examine its culture and make sure that it's what it wants it to be. So I've worked a long time, 28 years in West Mercia, 3 years in Gwent, and I've experienced different cultures within those organisations, very, very different. Working in an organisation that I've been a part of for 28 years, it was more difficult to see what I'd grown up in. And it's also a difficult conversation to have with yourself, that you have to accept that you have benefited from the culture that perhaps you want to change. So it becomes really difficult as a person within an organisation for a long time. When I moved to Gwent, I could see and understand the culture straight away because I was an outsider to it. So that was a real phenomenon for me, and a bit of a changing point in terms of the work and understanding that I had around culture. So when I moved to North Wales 18 months ago now, the first thing that I wanted to do was to get out as much as I could across my organisation and find out what it felt like to work in North Wales Police. What did it feel like, and how was it? And it was really difficult to lift the lid on. It was very, very difficult to pin one thing down for me that really stood out in terms of North Wales. North Wales is a beautiful place, made up of both urban and rural communities. It's a place that lots and lots of people want to work, and lots of people have worked for a very long time. So it's really important to me to get to the bottom of that. I wanted to understand how working in such a community, there's some real benefits to it. It makes it a really warm environment to work in. If you are part of the community that you police and you contribute in a public service way, which is part of what we want in terms of the College of Policing's sort of code of ethics, and it's part of what we talk about in terms of good values, is being part of public service. Then we have lots and lots of staff who volunteer for and do things in their community because they like doing it, because they're part of the community. It makes it really warm, and it makes it a really beautiful place to be. and you feel very welcome there. But on the other side of that, you can create closed environments that are hostile to change. And if you are trying to bring about a culture in relation to understanding the phenomena of violence against women and girls, it's really difficult to achieve an upstander environment in a place that's quite closed, and a place where actually there's not much movement and people don't move about very much. So challenging some of those cliques, those sorts of clubs, those sorts of environments was really important. And my overall aim was very, very simple. I want to create the happiest, most inclusive environment that I possibly can, because like Jim, I am absolutely 100% tied to the concept that how we treat each other in the workplace has a massive effect on how we treat the public. And I think it's an integral and important part in relation to the journey that we're on around violence against women and girls. So I was looking for the opportunity really to do a cultural audit. I think culture is a leadership issue. I think it's the most fundamental issue that we have to tackle as leaders of any organisations. But what I didn't want was, I did not want a corporate big sort of organisation coming in to do that work. And neither did I want, with the best will in the world, somebody who'd worked in policing for the whole of their career, because they would have the same sort of issue that I had, in terms of the fact that sometimes the culture of an organisation has served people in a way that's been beneficial to them. And it's really difficult to be able to convince people that you really want to change the culture if you've benefited from it. So that was a really important thing for me. I came along, as you know, Rick, because you were there, to Cumberland Lodge. Jason and Joanna were there talking about the work they were doing in Devon and Cornwall. And I thought and felt that it sounded right for me when I moved to North Wales. So that was where our relationship began. And, you know, what it has led to is a real, I think, a journey that Jason and Joanna have been both understanding in, challenging in, intimate in, but they haven't let us off the hook. And you need those critical outside individuals, I think, to really challenge you in terms of how you do things, because every time I chair a meeting or go in to talk to one of my team about something, I'm thinking continually about some of the challenges that we have uncovered and been part of in terms of the cultural audit work that we've done, and now the work that we're doing in that same and similar sense around the inclusive leadership programme. So, you know, all of my sergeants and inspectors and police staff equivalent have been through a 4-day inclusive leadership programme. And with Jason and Joanna, all of my senior teams have been through a really challenging 4-day experience, which has been challenging the way they think and their responsibilities in terms of change as well. So we are progressing along that journey at the moment. For us, I think it's been a good thing. It's brought a lot to the surface, and it's allowed us to be able to deal with some things of the past that had been left and not said, not done, and not finished for individuals, and that was causing them quite a lot of, I think, distress. So we've been able to work our way through some of those, and we still continue to do so. Rick, I think that's it for me, if that's okay.
Yeah, brilliant. No, thanks very much, Amanda. That's great. So a really great picture, and very, very honest appraisal from both of you about the challenges that you were trying to address. So I just wanted to turn to Joanna and Jason now. I don't know which of you wants to sort of kick off first, but could you just tell us a bit about the getting into the meat of the work you've been doing? So the first bit is the cultural audit. Could you say a bit about, you know, what you do there and about the kind of things that you were finding through in that sort of first phase of the work?
So our cultural audits are really based around narrative and reflection. So we listen to people's stories basically, and importantly, we don't really care whether the stories are true. It's not really that important whether they're true or not. If these are the stories are the currency of the culture. So when we capture all the stories and then we lay them out in in a format where we can see whether there are in groups or out groups, where there are key themes. So we do a thematic analysis of those stories. Again, doesn't matter whether they're true or not, just to figure out what are the key themes that are holding the culture in the space that it is, because culture doesn't change unless we intentionally change it. And we say we take a phenomenological approach, which is a sort of source of science, really, in that by just looking at what's there and then reflecting that back to the people in the culture, it feels really different, and it's really impactful. But also it gives you targets, I suppose, precise targets of where the dysfunction is and what needs to change. And from that, then we take a psychological and neuroscientific approach to explain and to help people understand why we've got to where we've got to, without the blame and shame, because we're all just human beings at the end of the day. Jason, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, only to quickly say that we often talk about, if you dived into a goldfish bowl and swam down to the goldfish and say, "Hey goldfish, how's the water?" The goldfish would say, "What water?" And culture is very much like that. And just building on what Amanda was saying, is that, you know, by having a third party reflect back to the organisation what those narrative themes are, it can be a really useful way to understand the unintended consequences of the decisions and the actions that are being made. So one thing that we would say in all of the work that we do, particularly within policing, is that the vast majority, with very, very few exceptions of that we...
Are you breaking up a little bit there, Jason?
Yeah, sorry, you're breaking up.
Sorry,
Colwell.
am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Am I back now?
Yeah,
you're
vast
back
majority.
Sorry, just I don't know where I got to. So the vast majority
majority
of individuals we talk to are really hardworking, fantastically dedicated individuals. So when we can reflect back to them that actually these are just unintended consequences, it really helps remove some of that blame and shame. And I think that that in itself is a really cathartic experience and is part of the culture change before we even get to any kind of intervention.
Yeah, I was going to, because Karen in the Q&A has asked that question. How do you take blame and shame off the table? And so what you're saying is it's by explaining to people that these things can be unintended consequences of the, you know, of the culture and of the way in which people are working, if I've understood you right.
That's right. And it's so we unpick the psychodynamics of the interpersonal behaviours that are going on, because at the end of the day, we're all coming to work with a head full of stories that we're bringing from home and from the past and all our previous experiences. And some of us have had an easy time of it. Some of us haven't had such an easy time of it. And then we're mixing, it all goes into a mix. And so some people have got a tolerance for change that is wide. Some people have very little tolerance for change because they're already quite overwhelmed. Then we look at that in the work context in terms of expectations of what our leaders are expecting us to deliver, whether that's the Home Office or whether that's your chief inspector, that then is overlaid on top of that. So if you then look at that from a neuroscientific perspective, you can see how some people are much more likely to go into fight mode or into flight mode, depending on that history, and that normalizes it. When people go, "Oh, actually, I can see that on that day I'd had quite enough." So we don't just, besides the neuroscience, we then bring in some psychoed tools that allow us to contain some of that stuff, and you can actually start predicting how people are going to react based on what we know about the neuroscience and about people's previous experiences. So we kind of open that psycho field as a place of to find a place of safety in it, rather than being overwhelmed by it. And that's a real revelation for people, because it really resonates with people. People really feel and understand how all that happens, that then the blame and shame is completely gone, because right, okay, that's what humans do. That's how human psychology works.
Yeah. Jim, you had your hand up. Did you want to comment on this point?
Well, Joanna's just basically explained what, in far more eloquent terms than I ever could. My point, my understanding of this and working with Jason, Joanna over the years, is that, without an explicit awareness and understanding of what drives human behaviour, some of this behaviour is inevitable. and it will always occur in organisations where people are working together. What I'm talking about is not the top end kind of misconduct, criminal behaviour. It's all the stuff that happens on a daily basis that means some people have a really positive working experience and others don't, simply because of what they experience in terms of their human relations with their peers, their supervisors, those that work for them. And it's the moment you arrive at that individual and indeed collective understanding and acceptance that that is just how it is, then you move on to what can be done about it. That's it. So yeah, I mean, this is subconscious an awful lot of the time, and bringing it into the conscious understanding is the really important step.
And
if I can just quickly,
yeah, Jason, please
add to that, just very quickly to say also that if you put that normal human behaviour under an environment where there's a huge amount of pressure and stress, then that exacerbates the problem and makes those unintended consequences even more likely. And as soon as when we then add that layer, then we can then deal with the entire situation with a little bit more compassion for both ourselves and for those around us. And again, that further aids that kind of cathartic experience and let's get rid of the blame and shame. And as Jim said, what can we now do about it? How can we deal with this differently?
Right. And so what we're dealing with here, I mean, and specifically in relation to policing, is environments that can be very stressful and in which people, I think you've talked before about a lack of psychological safety. Can you just can one of you just explain what that means to us? So
a lack of psychological safety means that we're operating, we say, outside of our window of tolerance. So Dan Siegel is a American psychologist who conjured up the model of the window of tolerance, whereby we have, if we're outside of our window of tolerance, it means that our prefrontal cortex is turned off, i.e. the thinking part of our brain, the part of the brain where we can plan, where we can organise, where we can be curious, where we can collaborate and negotiate and stay grounded. That part of our brain gets turned off when we're outside of our window of tolerance, and then we're back into limbic system activity, where we become reactive, where we take shortcuts, where heuristics are the order of the day. And that is the basis of bias. That's the basis of discrimination, because we want to close down anything that is going to add to the overwhelm. The more things that add to the overwhelm, the less capacity that we have with our prefrontal cortex to actually make a much better decision and to go outside wider, to have a wider line of sight on what other information is available, on what other people's feelings might be going on at the same time. So if we stay within our window of tolerance, or if we have a wider window of tolerance, we have more capacity to learn, to be curious, to tolerate being wrong, to tolerate getting stuff, not knowing everything. All of that stuff becomes much more prevalent, and also the brain feels less stressed as a result of not putting all of that pressure on us. So therefore, it's like a momentum that builds, and your window of tolerance gets wider and wider once you learn and understand what it is that closes it down.
If I can just quickly add to that as well, Rick, just to say that at an individual level, psychological safety, as Joanna's described, really allows us to operate within our window of tolerance. When we're not in our window of tolerance, collectively, organisationally, not to be too geeky about it, but we reduce the amount of organisational justice within the organisation, i.e. we can't rely on the policies, processes, systems within the organisation to keep me safe or to treat me fairly. When we see a deterioration in organisational justice, we see a deterioration in procedural justice in the way that we deal with the community. So therein lies the direct link between psychological safety at an individual level, organisational justice at an organisational level, and procedural justice at a community level. And all of that, without being too geeky about it, has been really well documented, well researched over 50 years across all different industries. We prove that there is a direct causational link between how an individual feels psychologically safe and their ability to perform in that role, in their role, however that is measured.
Right. Really, really interesting. And could we turn a bit? So Amanda and Jim spoke a bit about the interventions that you've done, but I just wonder, maybe starting with you, Joanna, if you could just say a bit about the interventions, so the kind of work that you then do following the cultural audit.
So following the cultural audit, part of the intervention is to actually play that back and to have people experience what that playback feels like, because we're actually just holding up a mirror to what we found, and everyone goes, yeah, that's definitely us, that's definitely us. And then following on from that, I mean, certainly with Devon and Cornwall Police, because disproportionality was one of the key drivers for the work, we do some cultural work. So one of the interventions is to undertake a cultural genogram. So everybody in the room privately, they don't have to share the information at all. They just look at what are the early influences that that form the neural pathways, the architectural foundation of their neural pathways have been built by the culture that we were subject to up until 7 or 8 years of age. And then we ask them to compare some of the psychodynamics from that cultural genogram to where they are now and who they hang around with and who they feel safe with and who they don't feel safe with. And it becomes really apparent then that, of course, that's why I feel dysregulated when I'm with someone. My gran used to talk about these people all the time, and it's still in there. It's still with, and then we give them some tools to override that program. So we give people tools that allow them to remain in the present, to keep that prefrontal cortex open. We give them some tools that enable them to use the full capacity of that thinking brain, and to acknowledge and recognize when they're being dysregulated, when they've gone outside of their window of tolerance, and some breathing tools, other tools, in order to bring them back into that window of tolerance, and to accept and to have some self-compassion about why it is that they're moving in and out of that. And it's a real relief for everyone. In fact, most people say, oh, this is really good for home. I don't know about work, but it's making me get on with my wife a lot better and all of that sort of stuff. So it's an all-round thing, because it's our psychology. It's not just about work. But in fact, you know, if you're reducing people's stress at home and giving them an understanding about why the dynamic is as it is at home, then they come to work feeling better anyway. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. Jason, I don't know if you had anything to add to
that. Not really, just to say that as Joanna's describing it, you know, kind of works for both home and for work, it's kind of foundational. So it just means that no matter what the challenges that individual is facing in their day-to-day role, it means that they're much more broadly equipped to be able to deal with that. So what we kind of say, we don't do training. Our work is much more experiential. We don't come in to solve a specific issue. It's much more foundational, so that actually we're elevating the skills within the organisation, the capacity and the capability of the organisation to respond to whatever comes along. And that ultimately is at the heart of organisational resilience, because the set of challenges that the police face today, we can solve those problems today, but tomorrow there's going to be a load of more other issues to face. So our work is much really at that foundational resilience level to be able to respond to anything that comes along.
Brilliant, thank you. Amanda, you wanted to come in on this point.
Yeah, so I think, you know, sitting in the back of this for policing, there's also been, you know, sort of reviews that have happened over the past few years. And I suppose this does link to some of the journey that we've been on with Jason and Joanna and continue to be on. So, you know, Casey looked at and sort of made the query of forces around institutional racism. Angelini is making that same case in relation to being anti-racist, anti-misogynistic, anti-sexist. I suppose the reason that I wanted to really do the work with Jason and Joanna is because I'd much rather be in the space of being in a position to help my staff through something that is really difficult, that every organisation is going to have to work its way through, rather than just making a statement. I really wanted to be in a position that we had been able to put a framework in place, a set of tools in place, a deeper understanding in place, because I think what Joanna really eloquently described there in terms of the frontal cortex and, you know, the areas that people operate within tolerance levels, they're more powerful for people to be able to understand themselves and to be able to understand how they're reacting and keep themselves in check, rather than me as a leader of an organisation stand up and make a statement with nothing behind it to be able to support my staff. And that's, I think, a really important part of the journey that we are all on in policing, and I think that society is on as a whole, and other organisations should be on, because I don't think it is a phenomena that is just relevant to policing. I think it's across the board. But, you know, again, that keenness to be in a place where we had tools, we were able to work with our staff, and we're able to have adult conversations, not you know, adult child conversations where I'm you know, a leader that is telling my staff off for something that, you know, actually starts to bring in that disharmony and starts to bring in, I think, more problems than it actually solves. So that again was part of the motivation.
Oh, that's brilliant. Really helpful. And so lots of people in the chat, well, quite a few people in the chat are asking about impact. So I wanted to sort of pivot into that now. And I see Jim's come in. Jim, I wanted to ask you about, because obviously you've been working on this for a few years now. And I wondered if you could describe from your perspective what you thought the impact of the work has been within Devon and Cornwall, please.
Yeah, so I'm really keen to come in on this. So I would see it kind of 3 levels of impact, consequence, difference it's made. On the first hand, in terms of our outright disproportionality in terms of some of the key policing activities, stop and search, use of force, arrest, suspect designation, all of those have come down. They've come down during this period, and I would attribute a large part of that. And there's a reasonable challenge in there to say, how do you evidence that? But actually, one of the major things we changed in this same period is the Senseia program, the inclusive leadership program. So, you know, our disproportionality rates have come tumbling down. There's still more work to be done, but we've seen a measurable and statistically significant reduction in terms of our disproportionality. That's on the one hand. In terms of those leaders that have gone through our inclusive leadership program, they are reporting you know, greater levels of engagement with the organisation, greater sense and perception of being valued by the organisation, greater confidence in terms of being able to have adult-to-adult conversations, as Amanda references, and creating a space for meaningful dialogue within the organisation. And there's a whole suite of metrics that Jason and Joanna have collected through the evaluation of the programme that point to the positive impact it has on individuals as they move through that learning programme. And the final area is one I've already just nodded to, is the organisational lexicon, the language that we use within the organisation. I hear more and more of my senior leaders more often talking about the need for adult-to-adult conversations, and recognising that perhaps historically, and particularly when we're under pressure, we default to parent-child. And parent-child can get things done, but it doesn't inspire, it doesn't motivate, it doesn't create trust, and it certainly undermines psychological safety, going back to the earlier conversation. You know, so we take far more care and attention now in terms of creating space for meaningful dialogue, and when we're in that meaningful dialogue space, ensuring that we are operating as adults and not parent and child. You know, the work still needs to be done, standards still need to be met, and absolutely issues need to be addressed head on. But the manner in which you do it and the perspective in which you approach those conversations and those exchanges, there's just more thought and care given to those now to achieve a different set of outcomes. And it's changed the language and how we talk to each other. And I see that on a daily basis in my organisation, in our organisation now, and it's really quite heartwarming. And it's not just at a senior level. It's not just chief officers going around talking. You know, it's at every level of the organisation, and we're hardwiring this into our PDR processes now, our promotion processes, how we recruit and select as well. You know, so it's really fundamentally changing the language we use, the processes we rely on, and indeed the outcomes we're achieving for our communities, which is ultimately why we did it in the first place.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Jim. And I mean, and just to sort of hang a lantern on the point you made about disproportionality, because I've read so much over the years about how it's impossible to change disproportionality. It's this stubborn thing that never changes. And here we have an example of these rates falling quite significantly. So this is a very significant set of findings and intervention. So really heartening to hear that. Amanda, you wanted to come in on this question around impact as well.
Yeah, this is not a comfortable process to go through, and I remember having an early conversation with Joanna and Jason of is this, is this all right, because actually it feels quite difficult, and it feels a lot more sort of challenging than have I done the right thing, is it going to be okay, and one of the things that I've really learned from them is, and they were referencing, there's no hallelujah moment here. The angel Gabriel is not going to appear and light is going to be shining everywhere and everybody is going to feel much better. There's a gradual process that you have to go through. And what is really warming about it is seeing now the amount of people that will have, and we use the term meaningful conversations. They are meaningful conversations with me as a senior leader, with the rest of my exec team, and with others in the organisation. We're starting to really get to some of the roots of some of the issues from years ago to present day, and they are really good conversations to have, because the reality of it is that our staff have the answer to a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve. And if we take the time to have those adult conversations, we can work through this together, and we can get to a really good place. So I've had a number of the feedback areas that Jason and Joanna identified, the mirror back into the organisation, which I think felt uncomfortable as well. It feels uncomfortable. We weren't in a position where we had a critical incident in the same way that James did. So there wasn't anything that was driving it other than the fact that we felt that the culture wasn't where we wanted it to be. And we wanted to look at the good things in our culture that we wanted to keep, and the things that perhaps were undermining that, and how we wanted to change them. So I think, it was quite a difficult journey for some of our staff to work their way through and get to a level of not acceptance, but of understanding, and ensuring that this can help them further in terms of their own, sort of career, their own place in the organisation, their own service delivery, their own relationships with their colleagues, all of those things that I think start to become a real focus and start to become really damaging for an organisation. So, for us, it's been really good, and we're working through metrics at the moment with Jason and Joanna. But if you judged it on feeling of an organisation, it feels a very different place a year and a half in.
Right, really interesting. One question, which I guess to Jim and Amanda, is from Suzanne, who says, I find this conversation incredibly encouraging. Are the two forces able to talk about this process with their local communities, or is it better simply to demonstrate the change it's making for how policing works in their area? So is this something that you're explicitly talking to your communities about, or are you just doing it internally and then expecting that will have an impact on the relationship between the police and the community? So Jim, I don't know if you wanted to go first on that one.
Yeah, we haven't, through our usual mechanisms, so through our local reference groups, and our kind of usual touch points with the local communities. This has been such a significant piece of work for the organisation that those conversations have naturally flowed. So there's an awareness and understanding through those touch points into our communities. We haven't done a big kind of jazz hands piece around it, because I don't think that's appropriate. We have talked on many national forums. I've been on stages alongside Jason, Joanna, the College of Policing, for example, talking about this in order to share the learning and try and encourage other forces and indeed other agencies. We've worked closely with some of our local fire services, for example, and I know Jason and Joanna are engaged in conversations with other agencies. So that's the approach we've taken, through kind of natural dissemination rather than creating bespoke and tailored opportunities so far. I'm always happy for another approach, of course.
Amanda, is this something you've talked to the community about yet? Or?
No, very similar to Jim, if I'm absolutely honest. We've spoken about it quite a bit at a partnership level, because I've got leadership partners in other organisations who are really interested in what we're doing and looking at it themselves in terms of some of the challenges they're trying to overcome, and where it is relevant, appropriate, and I think supportive in terms of understanding for our local communities, then we have and we would do. So local reference groups, independent advisory groups, that type of thing, we've definitely used it there. Our joint audit committee have had a full briefing on it. Our police and crime commissioner, sort of fully engaged in that as well. But definitely haven't looked to do it as a a big piece to our communities, because I think it's more important that we, really harness the work, and the difference to our community is seen in the service delivery because of, the organisational and procedural justice changes that I think come out of it. So it's been more of a test us on what you see rather than what I tell you.
Yeah. Jason, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, just to say that one of the reasons why, as Jim and Amanda have explained, the approach has been taken is that there is always a risk with making a statement about the output of a cultural audit, that the nuances within our work gets taken out of context and it forms a headline, which then actually creates a lot of shame and blame and ultimately resistance within the organisation that you want to change. So, as Jim mentioned earlier, we never produce a final report, and actually all of the work that we produce remains the copyright of Senseia, ultimately to protect the integrity of how that data is presented, because we would never want actually this work to further exacerbate the problem, which it would if it was taken out of context and was treated with blame and shame, which then just leads to resistance.
Yeah, really helpful. We've had a few questions about how the work can feed into the sort of national discussion about culture change in policing and the issues facing policing. I don't know if I know Joanna, you've been talking about doing some work with the College of Policing. Is that one of the ways you've been trying to feed in at the national level and share some of the learning?
Yeah, so the College of Policing came to, I think it was the diversity conference, the NPCC diversity conference in London, and we were sort of showcasing some of our work, and so they've invited us to deliver a leadership programme to them so that they can actually experience it. It's very difficult to talk about the work, the intervention, because it is an experience, and it's a emotional experience. So we're going to be delivering it to them so that they can have that experience and then figure out how that might be shared across police forces. Yeah.
Right, that's really helpful. Let me one point that a number of people have made in the chat. Sorry, Jim, is it on this point? If you want to come in on this point, then I'll ask this other question.
Yeah, it is on this point, and I think we have to be honest and aware that this isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There are situational factors that need to be in place in the host force to allow this intervention, this methodology to work. And I suspect that if you went across 43 police forces, you wouldn't find all of the situational factors that need to be present in order to make this a success in every force. So this won't work in some forces. It will never work in some forces because some of those situations, and I won't go into them, but you can probably have a feel for what I'm talking about. That there needs to be a place for this to land before it's even kind of anywhere near the organisation. Otherwise, it will just bounce off, as per my earlier comments.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And a comment that a number of people have made in the chat is people questioning the use of the word police culture, which I've used very often, but I've used it recognizing that it's a lot more complicated than that. And people are saying, isn't it true that within policing there are multiple cultures, different types of, Jim, you've just been saying there are different cultures and different forces. Amanda made the same point. Jason, Joanna, could you say something about that? People are sort of saying there isn't one culture, there are subcultures. How do you, how does it feel to you, having been working in this context for a few years?
I would say that that's absolutely correct. I think that what we would observe is that there's some kind of foundational elements to police culture that we've observed across all interactions with different police forces that we've had, and with North Wales and Devon and Cornwall Police, that's no exception. But equally, as Jim just alluded to, there's lots of different variation in all of that as well. I think that one thing that I think is really important to say is that having a culture and having subculture is completely normal. It's just part of what makes a human being a human, to be part of a community that you feel connected to. And often that's a sub-community within a larger organisation. And there's no right or wrong with that. We're not in any way saying that some subcultures are bad and some cultures are good. What we're saying really with our work is how do we make sure that we hold the boundaries of what is acceptable across all cultures within the organisation, so that we're not further demonising or kind of dismissing a group as being not part of our group. We're actually moving into a space of acceptance, but also acknowledgement that there needs to be a standard that has to be upheld. And I think, as Amanda and Jim have both alluded to, that is the role of leadership, to make sure that wherever you are in an organisation, whatever culture you're part of, that's okay. But as leaders, we need to hold the boundaries on what is acceptable behaviour in any of those cultures. Yeah, no, really, really helpful. Well, look, I think we're close to the end. I've got a question here from Robin Merritt on Operation Soteria, which is sort of linking. I don't know if anyone is familiar enough to pick this up, but he says changing culture is at the heart of Operation Soteria. Do you think this work could help secure the benefits of Soteria's approach? I don't know if anyone has a thought on that. Soteria, for those who don't know, is the work around improving the way in which policing deals with rape and investigates rape and serious sexual offences. Jim?
I would say connection between, what is at the heart of Soteria in terms of, suspect focused, victim sensitive investigations around rape and serious sexual offences, that sense of compassion and kind of a trauma informed approach, all of that, all of the language we're hearing around policing, it's all in the same ballpark as to what we're talking about here. It's about human relations and seeing humans as human beings rather than just things. And I always talk about, I don't always talk about this because that'd be boring, but I often talk about, policing finds a way to cope with the trauma of policing. And one of the ways is we label everything. So humans stop becoming humans, humans become victims, they become offenders, they become witnesses, they become mispers, they become drug addicts. They're all human beings at the end of the day. And, part of this and part of something the real focus in my organisation is really building compassion back into day-to-day policing, and stop labeling things, but getting past the label and getting to the human being. So, which is, the very essence of Soteria, both in terms of, making sure we focus, hard down on the suspect, the offender, the perpetrator, but we are compassionate towards victims. So I would say there's a natural overlap or connection, definitely.
Thank you. Amanda?
So the work that Jason and Joanna are doing with us is all around understanding not only your organisation, but understanding yourself. So I think the work is incredibly personal to the individuals that go through the sessions that Jason and Joanna put together. It goes to the very heart of understanding how you operate, what you do under certain circumstances, and how you can put a mechanism in place to really remind yourself of those areas that you might want to keep in check, you might want to keep under control. And that, again, is at the very heart of what Soteria is about, from the point of view of demonstrating and being in that compassionate space. And obviously having that ongoing conversation with yourself to be in that compassionate space in terms of that victim focus. So I don't think it just holds itself to Soteria, it holds itself across so many other elements of the things that we do across policing, because policing is not a matter of policy, process or procedure, it's a matter of people. And, in order for us to be able to be really effective police officers, we need to really hone those people skills to the best that we possibly can do. And in order to do that, you've got to understand yourself and how you work, how you operate, and how you are able to reach into that tool set and really give the very best of yourself to your colleagues and to the community.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, look, we're out of time, but I have to say this has been an incredibly inspirational conversation from my point of view. And I should also say to the audience that Joanna and Jason haven't paid me to put this on. This is genuinely a piece of work that we the Police Foundation just found really interesting, and we've been engaging with them on it for a couple of years now. And I think it's been a brilliant session. And thank you to all four of you for coming along and sharing that. I'm sure, as the audience are saying, they've really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And I think it's got to the heart of a lot of issues that policing sort of wrestling with. And we can, I think we can all take a lot from it. So thank you so much. It's been a really
Thank
brilliant
you, Ray.
conversation.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
our pleasure. And just to say to the audience, thank you all for attending. We have more sessions lined up. I'll just quickly run through what's coming up in terms of our future exchanges. 28th of June, we're speaking to the National LGBTQ plus police network, having a conversation about inclusion on 28th of June. So please join us for that. 20th of July, we've got Professor Paul Taylor, a National Chief Scientific Officer at the NPCC, talking about science, technology, research, and how that can help improve policing. And then on the 29th of August, we've got former Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu talking to us about his career in the Met, in counter-terrorism and beyond. So some really great speakers coming up over the next few months. But in the meantime, thanks so much to Jim, to Amanda, to Joanna, to Jason. Thank you all for joining us, and have a nice weekend. Thanks very much.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, Rick.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.